Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, as you are all coming into the webinar this afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I think we have everyone here. So first item on the agenda is our usual welcome to country. In the spirit of reconciliation, Limelight Arts Travel acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Thank you. Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone, once again. And I'm joined today by Dr Anna Lebovic. She's an Australian cultural historian and a highly experienced educator, researcher, and tour leader. She has a PhD in history from the University of Sydney, and her doctorate was the first academic history of America's preeminent fashion magazine, Vogue. She has delivered public lectures at venues such as Hazelhurst Arts Centre in Sydney and the ADFAS Society, and has led fashion tours for one of Australia's leading cultural tour operators. Anna joins us this afternoon to talk about the World of Wearable Art, a unique competition showcasing a different perspective on fashion as art, and held annually in Wellington, that has gained a global reputation for innovation and creative design. Good afternoon, Anna.
Hi, Mark. Thank you. Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
I guess let's start with just you telling us a bit about your background and where your interest in fashion history began.
It's a good question because it's a niche, as we were
certainly
talking
is.
about earlier. Certainly, my mother always loves to tell me that I was a very fashion-minded child. So the notorious story in the family is my third birthday party. I did decree that everybody who attended had to wear a pink dress, my father and brother included. So it certainly was always on my
How did they go with that?
Look, that's a testament to my family that they just went, that's Anna and everyone. So there's a photo of everyone appropriately attired and me looking very pleased as a 3-year-old in the middle. But no, so I was certainly always very aware of clothes. I think a part of that is family background. So my maternal grandmother was a seamstress, but to an extraordinarily very, very detailed, excellent level. And I do remember sitting with her as a child designing clothes and her taking me to lace factories and ribbons. And so that was part of it. My paternal grandfather was a boot maker, again, in the Eastern European tradition, which is also, very detailed. Also grew up being very aware of craftsmanship in shoes and construction. So that is certainly a part of it. I don't have any questions. So I have a real appreciation for the workmanship that goes into clothing. That's one of the things I love to do, particularly on tour, is going into museums and you go into the archives and really seeing how a garment is constructed is really fascinating. In terms of academic interest, those worlds really converged, I would say, during my undergraduate studies. So I was very interested in gender and women's history, particularly in American history. And I was writing my honors thesis on Jacqueline Kennedy and trying to sort of understand basically where you get the emergence of radical feminism in the 70s. Do you start to see any kind of disruption with her as a first lady in the early 60s? And so in the process of researching that, I was looking at how she was being covered in the major newspapers and magazines of the day, started reading about that, and quickly realized that you had a lot of literature on the History of Life magazine, Time magazine, the New Yorker, the New York Times. But as soon as you got to something like Vogue or Harper's Bazaar, there was no academic history at all. And that was sort of about 10, 15 years ago when fashion history within cultural history hadn't really been filled in yet. So I was part of a new breed of scholars, particularly gender and women's scholars, who started to sort of fall down that rabbit hole, as it were. And that's when I got really interested in fashion. I thought, well, I'm going to do a PhD. I'll write on Vogue. And of course, in the process of writing about Vogue, then fell down the fashion history rabbit hole, which I completely fell in love with and started going to fashion history conferences around the world. And, it's a really tough life. But, you know, again, also understanding fashion as a really interesting kind of lens through which to also understand cultural change. So, yeah, so that kind of constellation of interests, I suppose, kind of hopefully help explains my unique little niche in this world.
Sure, sure. I guess we're here mainly today to talk about the event in Wellington, the World of Wearable Art, which
Mhm.
is a uniquely New Zealand thing.
Mhm.
Probably something that a lot of people don't know about or haven't heard of, but then I guess the people joining us today probably do have some
Mhm.
interest in this and a background and know a bit more.
Mhm.
Um, which designers have been the leaders in the New Zealand fashion scene over the years that have brought this about, that have made it be such a great global event that it is now?
Yeah, great question. I think if you're of a certain age, I think the moment that New Zealand fashion really kind of hit the popular consciousness, especially in Australia, was around that early 2000s moment. And certainly for me, I mean, at the time, I think I was a late teenager, so perfectly primed. But Karen Walker was the designer that was really the first, I think, to break through the barrier of there was a lot of fascinating design happening in New Zealand that some Australians were aware of, but that's the moment that it really jumped from New Zealand and Australia to the global international world. And Karen Walker was really instrumental in that, incredibly ambitious. She started her wonderful label, which of course is still going, in 1989 as an 18-year-old with a grand total of $100 behind her. So
Wow.
huge testament, right, to her ambition and grit and drive to build it to become what it's become today. But one of the things that she really did was she was one of the what we call the sort of New Zealand Four. Who were the first to show at big international fashion shows. And this, of course, included Zambesi. So they showed at London Fashion Week in 1999. And then Karen Walker followed that up in 2000 by being the first New Zealand designer to debut at New York Fashion Week. And that is really the moment when you can kind of see her tip over right into becoming a complete phenomenon. And so her design subsequently became, you know, the favorite of the moment with people like Lady Gaga and Madonna. But again, like you can do all of that if your designs aren't unique and innovative and don't connect. It's not necessarily going to follow through. One of the things that's really extraordinary and to this day about Karen Walker's brand is how she is very honest to her original artistic vision. And she kind of rose to fame with her kind of geek chic aesthetic, which has kind of gone mainstream now, but back in 2000 was really kind of a unique thing. It's sort of an eccentrically, you know, elegant kind of style. It's an interesting kind of hybrid mix. It's very kind of nerdy librarian chic, which again has kind of become a really well-known category now, I feel like with brands like Miu Miu, but back in 2000 was quite an interesting fusion. One of the things that she was really known for and still is really mixing the masculine, feminine, really androgynous, interesting kind of commentary on gender. And to my mind, again, this is my interpretation. I'd love to talk to people on tour about this.
Yes,
But to my mind, I think there's a bit of a feminist streak to her clothing in sort of questioning what a woman can and can't do and can and can't wear. And again, that's really fitting. I see that a lot in a lot of female New Zealand designers in particular, because there is a feminist streak to New Zealand's history, because of course it was, people forget, this was the first country to give women the vote in the world back in 1893. So there is a certain gendered preoccupation with Karen Walker that I think is quite unique, but also emblematic of wider designers. If I can also talk about another designer, if that's
yeah, sure. Go for it. I'm happy to learn.
Thank you, Mark. I'm happy to teach. But the other designer who's probably more recent that I think people are probably more recently aware of would be Kowtow, so named, of course, for the original Chinese intention of, you know, deep respect. But this was a label that was founded a little later in 2006, but it was a very much a slow burn type of story. It doesn't open its own sort of flagship store, despite opening in 2006 until 2018. So it takes quite a while to get going, but I feel like in the last probably 5 to 10 years has become one of the brands that when people think of New Zealand fashion, Kowtow tends to come to mind. And in part, that's because it had really revolutionary aims when it was created. It wanted to revolutionize the fashion industry by producing ethically sourced and sustainable fashion. So in a lot of ways, Kowtow is the opposite to sort of, if we have fast food and we think of McDonald's, we also have the issue of fast fashion, which a lot of fashion scholars have spent and design scholars spent a lot of time researching, things like Zara and H&M, which are about, incredibly cheap price points, but huge fashion churn. The opposite to that, and Kowtow is part of this, is the slow fashion movement, which kind of is the equivalent of the slow food movement. And that is, kind of admirable in many ways, because I think we forget one of the biggest sort of environmental polluters after the oil and gas industry is the fashion industry, because everyone's constantly buying these cheaply made clothing. It's, you see those documentaries, I'm sure you have on SBS and ABC, of just the incredible waste. And a lot of it is clothing of just people wearing once or twice and then discarding. So Kowtow is really kind of a circuit breaker. It's trying to, in its business model, produce an entirely different approach to fashion. And it's amazing that it's sustainable. So what Kowtow does is it only uses 100% certified fair trade organic cotton. So all the garments are made from ethically sourced materials. Famously, and it got a lot of press when it, I think, made this announcement, Kowtow never uses plastic zips. This is one of the big things in terms of marine life and waste. Again, right. Many of us are probably aware of from watching Attenborough documentaries, right? These are incredibly damaging to the environment, so it just will not do zips. In terms of the designs, they are deliberately sort of timeless and minimalist. So it is the opposite of trying to find, produce, follow the latest sort of fad. This is about producing quality clothing to keep for life. And then it kind of went a step further in recent years. So Kowtow introduced its own repair service in 2018. So you can actually buy something from Kowtow, send it back if, say, you have a hole or you've lost a button, and they will repair it for you. So again, that's the opposite to that, built-in designed obsolescence model of H&M. You wear it once or twice and throw it. This is about trying to prolong the life of your clothing. So
it's a good way to keep people interested in the brand too, isn't it?
Right. And so that, interestingly, then they kind of went a step further, obviously registering that this got a lot of press and a lot of interest and a lot of take-up. And then earlier this year, I believe they launched their Revolve platform, which is basically within the website for Kowtow. You can buy and sell your own secondhand clothing. So again, completely different kind of model. But I would say, again, one of the things that's so exciting and interesting about New Zealand fashion is this particular interest in sustainability across the board, but also within the fashion industry specifically. So, and again, to me, that's not culturally atypical for New Zealand, right? It's quite an ethically minded nation, has a history. 1894, first country to introduce the minimum wage, right? So these are real kind of preoccupations, and they've done research. So I think it's nearly 40% of all Kiwi shoppers prioritize purchasing ethical and sustainable fashion. So when they're going to buy something, they are looking on the labels as to where all the product and the material has come from, which again, I would like to think that that's how Australians or Americans or UK, I don't think that's kind of registers as high on the checklist.
No, maybe we're partway there, but not as far advanced as New Zealand.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting. So by nature of doing that, it sort of creates some innovation within the Kiwi fashion and design, the materials they use, the aesthetic. Well, how does that move that forward
in terms of the trajectory of
sustainability and the use of natural fibers, etc.?
How does it move it forward in terms of look, I think it's certainly
in terms of what the designers are doing to sort of prop that.
Yeah, well, as I said, Kowtow's sort of come up with this really fascinating multi-pronged sort of business approach to it. I do think New Zealand's kind of uniquely kind of geared for it though, because of the history of its economy, right? If most people, especially of a certain generation, I was telling my mother I'm going to do this New Zealand fashion tour, and my father said, "Is that really a place to go for fashion?" And my mother immediately said, "Yes, of course it is. That's where New Zealand wool is." And Dad said, "Uh-huh." And that is an association a lot of people have, and quite rightly, with New Zealand, is its long, long, long history as an extraordinarily high quality place for producing exceptional wool products. And that has always been built into, so that was in the 1850s. That was one of the key backbones of the New Zealand economy. Some people might actually remember that this was kind of what led to the big boom in 1951 in New Zealand's economy, when the so-called wool boom. And this was because America had entered the Korean War. They then wanted to stockpile wool products, and the prices kind of tripled overnight. And New Zealand was a major, major, major benefactor of that. So wool has always been a really, as a sustainable, ethically produced import export around the world, New Zealand's got a unique hold on that market, I would say. Does that help kind of answer your question? So I think in some ways that's sort of the foundation that some of this does springboard from, and they kind of interconnect.
Yeah, and I think I was sort of inferring about the innovative elements of the Kiwi fashion and design, etc.
Oh, yes, in terms of what makes it so unique. Yeah, well, so definitely the wool, I would say, is, and often you see that is a real hallmark. But the other thing that I think people think of New Zealand fashion you can't get away from is the Maori sartorial legacy, which is a really unique, rich, and extraordinary one. And, in terms of thinking about more recently, I think you and I were talking about it the other day, Mark, like the big kind of moment recently was when Jacinda Ardern, who was then the Prime Minister of New Zealand, went to visit Buckingham Palace in 2018. And famously, right, it was every newspaper around the world very cannily wore a traditional Maori cloak when she did so. Interestingly, it's kind of a motif for some of the big moments in Jacinda Ardern's prime ministership. She did it she wore one as well, I think in 2023 when she was making her farewell speech when she resigned. But what she was actually wearing was the what's called a korowai, which is a very kind of esteemed garment within Maori culture. It's a cloak, often, but not always, adorned with feathers, incredibly, incredibly intricate. These garments take anywhere from, sort of 3 to 4 months to a year to make. And so for that reason, the korowai is incredibly sort of prestigious. So they are generally gifted from sort of elite members of Maori culture to other elite leaders, people like chiefs and dignitaries, to sort of signify the wearer's manner. It's called manner, sort of honor or status, absolutely. So in Jacinda Ardern's case, hers had been gifted while she was in London from a Maori, so they can't sort of be acquired or purchased. It's very much an insular thing. Interestingly, if you're interested in this, we are on this New Zealand fashion tour going to visit the Museum of New Zealand, which has the world's greatest collection, as it should, you would hope it would, of these particular garments, and we'll be doing a behind the scenes tour. So hopefully we can have a look at them up close because they are extraordinary. But I mean, the story of Maori culture is, I was sort of digging into it a little bit over the week, is fascinating. One of the things people forget about New Zealand, I think it's the 6th largest island in the world, and it was one of the last places to be inhabited by people. So this doesn't occur until the Maori come from East Polynesia in around about the 1200s, 1300s. There was no one there for a very long period of time. And then subsequently they were joined sort of in the 1700s, first by Dutch settlers, and then in the 1700s by good old Captain Cook showed up, and everything got a bit more complicated. That said, that moment for Jacinda Ardern wearing that cloak, right, which went kind of viral, as my students at university would say, around the world, was a really lovely moment of kind of cultural unity for New Zealand, that did speak to, back home in New Zealand, that apparently all the Maori culture, and people were incredibly proud to see it spotlighted on the world stage. And full credit to Jacinta Ardern, an incredible moment of sort of very crafty fashion diplomacy, because she, of course, was quite famous for throughout her prime ministership of a very uniquely, specifically, I would say to a certain degree, isolationist viewpoint when it came to New Zealand's identity and culture, and especially its foreign policy. She really wanted New Zealand to sort of come into its own as its own country. So it was a very, again, one of the, Jacinta Ardern's detractors have often said she's more about message than substance. She does famously have a degree in communications, not politics. And she is very, very savvy and smart about it. But I think that's a very good example of, it being a really lovely healing moment for New Zealand and New Zealand culture, and also really spotlighting, this extraordinary sartorial legacy that is very unique, to New Zealand. When you see one of these korowai, there's no question that it could come from sort of anywhere else around the world. Hopefully that helps answer your question, Mark.
Sure. Yeah, and I guess it's not something we think of in culture, the sartorial aspect of it, and what that means to the culture. And as you say, New Zealand just seems to be so attuned to their Indigenous cultures and having the language in schools, etc. And although there seems to be some dissidence against that at the moment, but with the difference in government, but then the way Jacinta Ardern projected herself, as you say, on the world stage, that did become that seminal moment. And I can even see in my mind just one of the single sort of feathers, the outline of it as she wore it, just obviously, which was probably very deliberately placed, just so that you could tell that this was definitely from a traditional.
Yeah. I mean, it was just visually, it was a universal, right? If you saw that cloak, there was no question it came from Australia, or it wasn't a Native American. In that sense, mariculture, Indigenous culture, sartorially speaking, and Native American culture or Indigenous Australian culture, I do often think the visual part of it, when you talk about clothes, is very significant. You can't mistake it for anything else. And when it is sort of spotlighted or presented in those sorts of moments, it does call attention to it in a way that's very hard to replicate. You can kind of talk about it, you can describe it, but the visual, right?
Which then leads into the predominant use of one single color in fashion.
Right. Which is the other thing. Yeah. In terms of, sort of workshopping ideas, what makes New Zealand fashion so unique. So we've talked about wool, the sustainability, the mariculture and heritage. But also I'm always struck by it. If you go to New Zealand, it's an extremely vibrant country in terms of the landscape. It's just this extraordinary sea of sort of blues and greens, and it's magnificent landscape on both islands. Yet you see so many people, by contrast, wearing an extraordinary amount of black, even compared to Melbourne standards. And it is this really striking kind of contrast. And once you it's one of those things, once you see it, you can't kind of unsee it. You're like, oh yeah, there is a lot of people just walking around all in black. And as you kind of dig into it, that's not accidental. Right. There's a lot of kind of sort of building blocks that have gone into that. One, of course, which we all kind of know, right, is kind of the iconic sporting team, right? Right. That's a really interesting story, which I started to look into. The rugby team for New Zealand wore white until some moment at the turn of the century. And that became very kind of embedded in terms of New Zealand's psyche, right? As this is part of a big intrinsic part of their identity. But then as you move through the 20th century, there's this really, again, going back to the wool heritage and one of the largest employers and industries in New Zealand. The shearers in New Zealand historically always wore black sort of singlets, as opposed to in Australia, you tend to see shearers, especially in paintings and things, they're always in white. That's also a very specific New Zealand thing. And this has a really kind of iconic, it's sort of an in the know thing within New Zealand culture, that it's acknowledged that's a real part of a certain kind of New Zealand masculinity, a sort of shorthand for it. It's because it kind of idealized, it's romanticized of kind of this working class, almost a New Zealand equivalent of the Australian larrikin, right? Hardworking, working class, but a good character, someone who can kind of get on with things. Really interesting history recently, especially with New Zealand designers, of them reinterpreting that singlet. So elongating it for women. And again, once you see it, you kind of get a sense of this is what's actually going on. But there's a certain playfulness with black, that you can then trace right up to sort of recent moments. So Zambesi, one of the big designers who broke through in the early 2000s, they're famous for their kind of, it's almost a pseudo-Gothic kind of look. That's also a big kind of component of the New Zealand fashion sort of design scene. And again, it's got those really unique New Zealand influences and heritage that it draws from.
And the founder, wow, you sort of say that
Susie Moncrief, you notice it now. She's always in black. She never wears anything else, always in head to toe black. And again, it's one of those things, once you see it, you can't unsee it. So a lot of the sort of artisan designers in New Zealand do favor this all black kind of palette, which is, yeah, really interesting.
I was looking at photos of her in research for this and where she lives in this beautiful landscape. And it's all green around, but there she stands out with her silver hair and this beautiful black flowing sort of, I would call it a smock.
Smock's good. I like a smock. Smock's very forgiving
smock.
of large pasta dinners, of which I'm very fond. It is. It's kind of, as I said, once you kind of step off the plane there, you kind of like, wow, there is a lot of it. It's again, once you see it, you can't unsee it. It becomes a real kind of theme and motif. So, long story short is, if like me, you like black, New Zealand and this tour is probably the place for you to go shopping, in terms of designers and what they have on offer.
Well, now we mentioned it, we should talk about it.
Yes.
The fashion event that was born there and by Dame Susie, the World of Wearable Art, or WOW, as everyone calls it. What's the background to it? And tell us a bit more about how it came about.
Yeah, I mean, WOW has just gotten bigger and bigger, I think, every year. Really, really interesting heritage and sort of genesis story, if you like. Look, I mean, I kind of think I'll go with the quote from the website because it kind of encapsulates what it is in a nutshell, which is WOW is a world-renowned wearable art experience where an annual design competition culminates in a spectacular show. So, and that's kind of, I mean, that makes it sound kind of very sanitary. It's pretty visually spectacular. So if you are interested, I would encourage anyone to, just do a little bit of Googling, and especially the videos will give you a better sense. But it really is the world. It's unique. There's nothing like it anywhere else in the world that I'm aware of. So it is the world's leading wearable art design competition. And it's by far and away New Zealand's largest kind of theatrical sort of spectacle. So it's held every year in Wellington, in New Zealand, except I believe they had a 2-year reprieve during COVID, as we all did, which is kind of understandable because I think at the moment it runs for about 3 weeks every year. So this year the dates have just been announced there, late September to early October. But generally the event attracts around 60,000 people every year. It is huge. It is, and as I said, because people come from far and wide to see something that you just cannot see anywhere else. So it attracts entrants from around 40 countries around the world. And on this tour, we are very, very, very lucky. I believe Limelight snavelled some of the much sought after VIP tickets.
Yes, we've got VIP.
Yeah, which is they're incredibly hard to get, which is amazing. So that kind of gives you a really, up close and personal dinner, very unique, intimate kind of take on the whole spectacle. But in terms of its history, it was founded by now Dame Susie Moncrief, who we were just talking about, who has her fabulous house and her all black clothes. And she actually originally was a sculptor. So the story goes, from what I can gather, she was trying to exhibit some of her sculptures in a gallery in New Zealand and was horrified by how much they were going to charge her for the privilege of doing so. So with the true spirit of an entrepreneur, she said, I can do better than that, got together with about 5 or 6 of her sort of sculptor mates, and they purchased a very old kind of cottage building just outside of Nelson, which is a city on the very northern tip of the southern island, and decided to turn it into an art gallery. Now, the slight hitch was that this gallery space was apparently in the road going out of town. So no one knew where it was. So again, her being very entrepreneurial, they decided to hold a kind of competition with a prize, I think of about $200, to kind of try and attract attention and patronage, kind of this gallery on the map. And then this thing just got bigger and bigger and bigger every year. It sounds like it just had a life of its own. So it became so successful, they moved it to Nelson's Trafalgar Square, which was a bigger building in the city of Nelson. And then in 2005, it jumped up to Wellington just because they needed a bigger kind of space. And as I said, today, the event attracts around 60,000 people. It's a major part of the tourism economy for the Northern Island. I believe it's worth around 25 billion to the local, economy. It's because you have 60,000 people coming in for 3 weeks. Apparently, it's just worth huge amounts in terms of people coming in.
And these aren't saleable pieces. They're not pieces that people can buy or go to
a
fashion house or a gallery.
But I think having this many people coming in to see it, just in terms of tourism and then the flow-on effects of that, if you're going to go and see this, you may as well go and see lots of other wonderful things in New Zealand. It's just become bigger than Ben-Hur. And certainly within the design world, it's one of those things where people, if you say you've entered WOW or you've been sort of spotlighted in WOW, right? It's incredibly prestigious now. So, it's kind of what Susie Moncrief, I think, again, I like quoting her because she's such a great character. But she sort of said about it that her objective was and continues to be, and I quote, to take art off the wall and out of static displace, to adorn the body in wildly wonderful ways, to celebrate creativity in a lavish and unique on-stage spectacular that will inspire us all, right? So it is really kind of visually unlike anything else. It's a complete kind of mashup, if you like, for want of a better word, of sort of fashion, sculpture, music, design, performance, dance. And for that reason, I think its uniqueness, right, is part of its incredible appeal.
So how do you get to be involved? How do you become an entrant into this?
Good question. Although I suspect you and I probably won't be entering.
Not me, certainly not.
A garment anytime soon. I wish. I've always wanted to be creative. I'm unfortunately a wordsmith, not an artist. But actually, I think that's one of its key successes. It's incredibly inclusive. Anybody can enter as long as they're over the age of 18. And you can enter from anywhere around the world. So there's no sort of limitations on geography. One of the rules are that designers do have to enter under their own name. So you can't kind of enter a Prada entry.
So it's not commercial.
No. And that's, I think, also a really important part, protecting its kind of uniqueness. Businesses can't enter. You can enter as a team of up to 3 people. But again, it's kind of limiting that kind of corporatization of it, which I think kind of makes it, sort of gives it that grassroots, unique New Zealand kind of flavor. The other thing I think that's really critical to its appeal and longevity is that there are no limitations on sort of skills or backgrounds of entrants. So this means you get a really fantastic array of perspectives, skills that come to the table. So students can enter. You get a lot of fashion students entering, amateurs. So you get some people who are doctors, lawyers, and this is kind of what they create in their off time. You also get a lot of established professionals from a number of different design worlds, which is a great kind of interdisciplinarity. So you get some, designers, fashion designers, industrial designers, people from sort of an architecture background. And again, you can kind of see that diversity on display. So really critical. That said, if you do enter, there are a couple of rules, and they are pretty strict about this. Whatever you create, the garment has to be wearable. So, because of course, part of WOW is the actual fashion show. So you need to be able to put it on as a person, physically move around, be able to see, and for the garment to withstand being taken off and on repeatedly. So it's got to have a certain amount of structural integrity. It has to be original. There has been a little bit of controversy, I believe, recently, in terms of you can't infringe on the intellectual property of anyone else. That's a big key component of it. It needs to be technically innovative. And each year there are sort of 6 sections or themes, and designers have to kind of correspond to one of them. So you kind of got there's a New Zealand theme, there's an avant-garde theme, an open theme, and every year they have those same 3 themes every year. In addition, they have 3 unique themes every year that they kind of mix up. So this year, I believe the themes are metallic, kinetic, and my personal favorite, bizarre bra. So we will see what someone else can come up with to beat Madonna's Gaultier.
The Gaultier.
Yeah, exactly.
The famous Gaultier.
Exactly. I'm kind of looking forward to it. I want to see what they do in that brief.
I don't know if I'm putting you on the spot here, and if you don't know, that's fine. Do they have an international panel of judges, or do we know who the judges are?
No. So I was having a look at this. It's quite interesting. The judges are about 4 people. So we'll talk a little bit about how recently WOW was actually sold. So Dame Susie Moncrief no longer owns and runs it, but she has been retained as a judge. So they have I think 3 of the 4 people on the panel are actually sort of prominent in the New Zealand design world. So it's Susie Moncrief, the founder and owner of the Weta Studios, which you may have heard of. Again, we also visit the Weta Studios on this tour, which I'm really looking forward to. They're quite famous. They're very hard to describe what they actually do, but they sort of a lot of kind of industrial conceptual design, and they did, of course, the special effects, I believe, for The Hobbit and
Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings, but they do a lot more than that. So they're not sort of an animation studio. They're much more all-encompassing kind of design, but very New Zealand. So the owner of that is one of the judges, and one of the prizes that's on offer, we can talk about the prizes in detail because they're significant for WOW, is he has a specific prize, and they win a certain amount, and they also get to do a 4-week internship at the Weta Studios with him, which would be significant. And then I think there's a third, there's a sort of Maori local judge, especially to judge the New Zealand unit of the 6, which is kind of culturally appropriate. And then I think the 4th might be an international, but it's definitely got a very strong kind of local flavor that has been New Zealand flavor that has been very deliberately sort of protected and retained.
So how does the event all work, like from the designers entering right through to the event on the night? And
I know, you think about like a 3-week event, it's a mammoth thing to kind of pull off every night for this many people. It's quite a democratic process. Again, part of why I think it's so successful. So entrants enter virtually. So there's you can look it on the website if you're intrigued. Basically, designers submit their entry, so they have to fully complete their garment, but they do it via an online portal on the website. So they take photos of the finished garment and a video of the finished garment, and they sort of write a little bit of a précis or kind of a explanation of what they want the work to kind of be about. Now, interestingly, the name of the designer and their nationality is suppressed. So it's judged blindly, which I kind of like.
Right.
Yeah, which I think is, again, it's got this kind of democratic, very kind of New Zealand, down to earth kind of flavor to it. So it's a blind judging. And then the most innovative, so that the judges kind of review that. And then the ones that are deemed the most innovative and kind of outstanding are contacted and selected after judging to appear on stage for that 3-week process of the actual WOW performance. So these are kind of the finalists. So these are kind of, on display with really intricate staging and choreography and music. Now, that said, the judges make a decision about who kind of wins the different prizes before WOW begins, the actual show commences, is my understanding. And this kind of occurs on the basis of 6 criteria. So originality and innovation, concept, so how well they meet the brief for whichever of those 6 section themes they've chosen. The quality of the construction, so the workmanship, like it really does need, and it is impeccable on some of these garments. And it's got to kind of visually work right up close, but also on a stage, because that's kind of where it's being sort of showcased as part of WOW. Health and safety from the point of view of the wearer. Can they move around? Can they see? Can they breathe? All
Can
those.
they walk?
Yeah, can they walk? I was going to say, can they go to the bathroom? Probably not for some of them. I don't think that would be that high on the, but yeah, can they kind of walk around on a stage? Because don't forget, in some of these cases, people are dancing whilst wearing them on stage. So, it's in terms of fashion, that's a pretty specific brief. It's got to be really kind of maneuverable. Performance potential is also a criteria. So sort of the theatricality of it is a big part of it. This isn't, the regular Milan runway. This is designed for a very different kind of purpose, as well as cultural considerations. So how sort of meaningful or respectful are entrants in engaging with unique cultures, say Maori culture or Indigenous culture. I mean, there was a winner a couple of years ago whose work was amazing, but was kind of a take on Aztec, Mexican. And again, how kind of respectful is it in appropriating, adopting, navigating all of that? So the final judging, as I said, tends to happen in Wellington before the actual show, and there's a lot at stake. The prizes are extraordinary. So
do the judges just do that based on what they see online that's being entered?
No, so I think they call them in, the ones that they kind of want, and then they make based on once they're in Wellington, and they're doing all the sort of pre-production of putting the show together. During that process, I'm guessing that they would review them and make the decision. So they would actually, absolutely, they'd be seeing them in person. But in terms of sort of making the short list for who gets to come, just because you enter, unfortunately, you don't get to go to Wellington and WOW. It's only sort of the best of the best. And then they make the decisions about who wins the prize. So the top gong, if you like, for WOW is the Supreme WOW Award. And that's given to the entry considered most exceptional. So the winner for that receives 30,000 New Zealand dollars, and the runner-up is 15,000. And as I said, there's also the Weta Award with the internship, as well as with the Weta Studio, as well as money. And there is also, just like the Archibald, a People's Choice Award. So I think you get to vote. Basically, everyone who goes to WOW throughout the 3 weeks of the shows gets to sort of vote on which one they like the best. And that's also handed out, which is kind of nice. Again, very kind of democratic, very kind of inclusive. It's a different approach to design, right? It's not this kind of stuffy in a gallery, see, don't touch. It's a much more kind of fun, and I think that's part of its appeal, right? It's just a different way of approaching design and art as a fun, joyful part of life.
And I wonder if the People's Choice correlates sometimes to the judge's choice, or like Archibald, never actually aligns.
I think that's everyone's favorite with the Archibald, right? That's always my favorite, to see what the people choose and how far apart they are from the judges. And it's often, some years it's like miles apart.
Definitely.
And that again, that's part of the fun of it. That's a very Australian, New Zealand kind of approach, I think, to these sorts of cultural events. What
about past shows, past events? Any sort of memories or memorable creations from that take your fancy, or particular?
I mean, I had a lot of fun over the weekend going down the rabbit hole of the so they've got a really extensive WOW archive on their website, and you can look at all of sort of not just the winning entries of the different categories, but they've got videos and stills and explanations of all the different entrants, and they're really extraordinarily creative. You just won't see anything like it. I did notice, again, historian kind of liking to check my numbers. In the past 10 years, there was a very clear sort of trend in terms of the winners of the top WOW Supreme Awards. So of the 10, I think we have to probably take 2 or 1 year out for COVID. But New Zealand designers have won 5 times. So they're the clear kind of forefront, followed by the US, won twice. as well as Indonesia has a really good follow. So they had two entrants, and one of those I think was in 2017. Really beautiful kind of traditional Indonesian silhouette and lacework, intricate, clearly laser cut. But in terms of recent years, I think my personal favorite would probably be the American entry that was the winner of the top sort of award in 2024, which was called Curves Ahead, and by Grace Duval. And it's kind of, again, you kind of have to see it. It's all made of recyclable materials, including I think we call them witches' hats. Cones make up the hat, which has this extraordinary profile. But the story goes, so she was there out in New Zealand in 2017 from the States because she had an entry, and she was touring around, the designer Grace Duval was touring around New Zealand just in the aftermath of the earthquake that had just hit there. And she was really inspired by, she saw the road crews to kind of doing the recovery in bright orange high vis, right? And the contrast with the extraordinary New Zealand landscape. And she apparently was really inspired by it. And you can see it in this extraordinary creation, which is made entirely of recyclable materials in neon orange with this incredible corset. But the hat is it's made of witches' hats. And they kind of all sit porcupine-like on the top of the head, but you can't see them from dead on. It fans out on the side, only when you in profile. Just incredibly intricate and clever. And smart, So I was really struck by that one because you could also, once you heard about the backstory, you could clearly see that feeding into the garment. But yeah, so many. I mean, there are so many that I could go on and on. But the archive just has, it's just because there's no kind of limits. As long as someone can wear it, and design whatever they like.
Mm. Well, we're about to wrap it up, but before we do, just on the future of the event, as you said, Dame Moncrief sold it on, and it's been bought by quite an interesting group, a Japanese group.
Yep. No, so she, the story goes, she sold it in 2022, in part because I think she'd been running it for 35 years, so she did feel, understandably, she had kind of done her time.
Pass the baton.
Yes, that's the one. She was ready for it to find its new leader and what do they call it? Protector. But I think she also found the COVID years were incredibly difficult, which she had to shepherd the event through, and that was quite tricky. But yes, no. So she decided to sell in 2022. And this was sold to Still, which was a company that was set up in 2020. And it has a very interesting, so it's a New Zealand-based company with a very specific kind of mission, which is to acquire or start 100 New Zealand businesses that are fundamentally good for New Zealand. Okay, so it's kind of got a very kind of, it's got a very patriotic kind of intent. And obviously the acquisition of WOW, given this incredible, momentum behind it, is, I think, what I understand, it's jewel in the crown now for that company. But Still is actually owned by the Japanese businessman Hideaki Fukutake. I'm hoping I said that right.
Fukutake.
Yeah, did I get it right? I think I was
close. Very close. No, pretty
well done. I'll stick with New Zealand fashion.
Maybe you had the New Zealand accent when you were
saying. Maybe. Well, interestingly, so he comes from this very sort of storied Japanese family that has a long history of nurturing sort of arts and culture projects. So he, together with his family, transformed what we now know as the Japan's famous art islands, which I think Limelight has a tour to those as well, which I would love to.
Yes, we've been doing the Triennale. We've got a tour that's just finished at the moment. That's done.
Oh, amazing! And I think they're about to open a new island is coming.
I must have a look at that.
No, I was
on the next tour.
Yeah, in the course of researching this, I was looking at going, I think they're about to. So like that's a art precinct that just continues. It's not a fixed one, is my understanding. That continues to kind of grow.
Yeah. So what they do with that every year, or the Triennale, they have artists that come in that are invited, and their installations are all over the islands, and some are permanent and stay, and
some rotate. Yeah.
But the ethos is very interesting. What you were saying about Still and what they want to do moving forward with that, because that whole thing is about renewal of islands that were otherwise rubbish dumps are not used, or
industrial wastelands, right? Exactly. And yeah. So it's, well, the interesting thing is, so the Japanese family behind that, they all now live in New Zealand permanently, which I didn't realize, but this has happened since about 2009. And I believe that Hida Ake, he actually has New Zealand citizenship now. So like this is where they are. So it's not a tokenistic dip in the pool. Yeah, they're fully committed as a family to New Zealand culture and cultural practices through this still organization. So in that sense, it's kind of the ideal person to take it over. My understanding was that Moncrief did kind of originally hope that WOW would go international, but the Japanese and the Japanese owners very much want to keep it as a New Zealand specific kind of entity. And I gather that they're all still get on extremely well. So Moncrief, as I said, still a judge on the panel for WOW. And is still quite involved and active, as is her sister, who was sort of a co-founder. She's also still quite involved in the event. So in terms of its, it's been a very kind of seamless transition. And I don't think it could have gone to kind of a more ideal family. But it is going to be very intriguing to see where they kind of take it since acquiring it. Wow. But so far, it seems like they haven't made too many changes. It's fairly just sort of the recovery post-COVID. Yeah. But we will see. Be exciting to see it in September.
You're looking forward to it, obviously.
I am very much.
Well, it's good that it's in good hands, and the tour is in your good hands as well.
Well, we hope.
With such a passionate interest in the subject matter and the event in particular. So
yeah, no, I mean, it's, as I said, I don't think you could journey anywhere in the world and you won't see anything like this. And it's virtually on our doorstep. Why wouldn't you? I think if you're interested in design and fashion, let's put it this way, it's one of those bucket list things to do, because you just won't see the spectacle of it. You won't see anything like it anywhere else.
Amazing. Well, good luck with the tour. Thank you for joining us today. And
thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Enlightening us on everything about WOW and New Zealand fashion. It's been really interesting. So, Dr. Anna Lebovic, thank you very much.
No, thank you very much, Mark.
All right. Cheers. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.